waiting for the streams to stream. So if you're watching this later, you're welcome. All right, let's get this going. Hello, everybody, and welcome to tonight's episode of The Mandate. As always, we have a fantastic guest that I will tell you about here shortly. But if you're new and you're here for the first time, thanks so much for spending your Wednesday evening with us. My name's Adam Hoffman. I started The Mandate to broadcast and share these open, authentic conversations with men and other people who are committed to making an impact on men's mental health. So in these episodes, I bring on guys who open up about their challenges and journey with mental health, what they've learned, what they can share with others. We talk to professionals in the space. We talk to authors, experts, therapists, coaches, and everybody in between who is working towards making mental health more accessible for everybody, but specifically, in this case, men. So tonight, I've got my current coach, Matt Helt, and we've been working together for a couple months now and got introduced through a mutual friend. And so tonight, we're going to talk about Matt's story with mental health and ultimately how he ended up becoming a coach and leaving his corporate career behind, although he was doing some pretty cool stuff. So with that, let me bring Matt up here right now. How's it going, man? Good to see you.
Good to see you. Doing good.
Yeah, good. How are you really doing? What's going on?
I can say that if I do like a quick check-in with myself, it's one thing I haven't felt in a long time, and that's hope. Today was in not hope in like, oh, everything's terrible, but in the sense of like what's happening to our country and being able to watch a peaceful transfer of power happen today. And all the stuff, the pomp and circumstance that goes along with it was really powerful to watch today, and just left me feeling really, really good. I could say in the last 2 weeks, I've had a lot of anxiety. Definitely felt that anxiety in my chest. That's usually where it manifests. And sometimes I'll be like, oh, do I have something wrong with my heart? And I'm like, oh, actually it's anxiety. It's those pains of anxiety that show up. So there's still a little bit there, especially like, 2 Wednesdays ago, it was madness. Just to see how everything has changed just in 14 days. It's left me feeling pretty good.
Yeah, I would agree with that sentiment. I think that today, I was actually pretty filled today with what I was working on and like got to go heads down on a lot of stuff, which was nice. And so then my proxy for how today was going was if I ended up with any alerts on my phone of shenanigans of any form or fashion. And, I think the most exciting thing that I got was that there was a push notification that Biden and Harris had been sworn in. And then there was another one from Twitter that said, there is a new White House account in the United States. I'm like, oh, well, that's interesting. And, I say all that knowing that it might not have felt that way for everybody who might be scared or concerned or having that feeling of anxiety of like, well, what are these next 4 years going to hold for me? Like I thought that there was progress and, just being able to, I think, continue to acknowledge that people are feeling all sorts of things right now is probably the most healthy thing that we can do.
Yeah. There's, half the voters, I won't say half the country because obviously not everyone votes, but half the voters out there don't feel the way we do. So how can we honor that instead of saying, well, just get over it? The way they feel is real, and we need to respect that. Maybe not in the way that, we didn't get that respect 4 years ago, but we can be the adults in the room and try to show that respect back to them.
Yeah, oh, absolutely. And I once again, I didn't get to see it, but just remembering what Biden talked about, I think on election night or election week, whatever it ended up being there, just about unity and being able to come together and trying to find that common ground. I think that that's kind of the mindset that I'm trying to take into this year and beyond. And there have been, I don't go and seek these conversations out on a regular basis, but with people who don't have the same political views that I do or philosophical views that I do, to be able to stay curious and to understand where they're coming from. And time again, what I find is that we're usually all coming from the same place. We just have different ideas of what the actual end solution looks like to get us there.
Mhm. Yep. Yep, for sure.
Well, with all that being said, we will leave that subject and carry on. I always love to start with talking about your journey with mental health. And you're one of the people in my life that I've just always been so impressed by your willingness to share so openly about what you've gone through. But I'd love to hear, when did you first start to think about Matt's mental health or your emotional and mental well-being?
Yeah, it was, I think when I got real serious about it was when I was at the tail end of my mental health crisis, which I didn't really realize I was in. So that started when I was 25. It began with a skydiving trip. I really wanted to get over my fear of heights. So I organized a trip with a bunch of people from work and said, hey, we're going to go learn how to skydive. You want to join me? And so I think there were 7 or 8 of us that got together and went through the training, and it was static line. So you did your very first jump by yourself versus just, like, hey, I'm going to strap myself to a guy and he's going to do everything.
Wow.
So not a smart move, especially for somebody who's terrified of heights. I went through the training and then was the first person in the group to volunteer saying, yep, I want to jump first. And when we got up, a very tiny plane, I'm kind of like curled up and, my knees up near my chest, right next to the door. The flight instructor opens the door and you're supposed to crawl out and hang on the bottom of the wing. And when I did that, I had a panic attack. Kind of lost all sense of where I was, what's going on. All I knew is that I had to let go of this wing. And when I did that, it just completely blanked out. I saw a wing fly, not a wing, but an airplane fly away from me. And the first thought I had was, why is there an airplane flying away from me? And I couldn't breathe, and it felt like my heart was going to jump out of my chest. So luckily, parachute, the airplane pulls your chute for you. I had a radio on my shoulder, and they talked me down, turn left, turn right. And as I was coming into land, again, I was pretty much blanked out. I forgot how to land properly. So the guy on the radio is screaming at me to flare. I didn't flare, and I just smacked into the ground. Fast forward after that, luckily I wasn't injured too bad. I did rupture a disc in my back, which is, didn't hurt then, but caused things later on. But a week later, I'm at work, and one of my colleagues comes up to ask me a question, and out of the blue, I have a panic attack. It felt exactly how I felt, when I was skydiving.
At the time, did you know that it was a panic attack?
Nope. Mm-mm. No, and one of the things that that I learned over the years was that oftentimes a panic attack will feel exactly like a heart attack. So I thought I was having a heart attack. And so I, for some weird reason, just like said, hey, I've got to go. And I ran to the bathroom, and I kind of like sat in the bathroom having this panic attack, which, I mean, if it was really a heart attack, I'd have been dead because I was isolating myself. But just tried to get away from the situation. It was like this, fight or flight. Well, in the moment I had the flight, I ran to the bathroom. About 10 minutes later, everything went away. I was back to normal. And I just kind of chalked it up to, oh, that was weird. But what it did is it set off about a 2-year cycle of constant panic attacks. So it was where I'd have 1 panic attack a week. And then I started to have 2 or 3 panic attacks a week. And then it got to be daily, and then multiple panic attacks a day. And then the other thing that not only was I having these panic attacks was that what I also didn't know at the time was I had obsessive compulsive disorder. So as the anxiety increased, so too did my OCD symptoms. And the OCD symptoms would creep up, and it would cause more anxiety, which would, it was just this ratcheting effect. And yeah, and the whole time for, the majority of those 2 years that I was going through it, I convinced myself that it was something physical. It wasn't, it couldn't be mental. It had to be physical. So I saw dozens of doctors, and nobody back then, this was, 20 years ago, back then, nobody said, we think this is mental. It was like, well, let's put you through another round of tests. Okay, let's do this. And then I go see the cardiologist. So I saw, multiple cardiologists, hooked up to heart monitors. I actually wore a heart monitor for a month. And every time I had a panic attack, I had to push the button. And then I got the results back and they said, there's nothing wrong with your heart. And it made no sense to me at all, because I would have these severe chest pains. I'd have this pain that would go up through my neck. My left arm would be in pain. It would go, all the symptoms of a heart attack. Yet they're telling me there's nothing wrong with my heart. So that was really difficult to try to manage all of that. And it wasn't until I got close to my 27th birthday. And I'll tell another story about being 27. But my wife says to me that she says, I'm pregnant. And rather than, a normal reaction from a husband would be, celebration, pick her up, swing her around. Instead, I had this like dread, because I was barely able to manage myself at that point. There were a lot of things going on, not just the OCD and the anxiety, but also self-medicating. The thing I noticed was if I had a drink, those symptoms would go away. And if I had 2 drinks, it would bury it even deeper. And so I started seeing a connection between my self-medicating. There's this thing, she's now pregnant. I need to get serious help. So what I did is I went and I set up an appointment with my internal doctor. We met and I told him everything that was going on. He's like, great, there's a pill for that. And it gave me no instructions. There was no sort of psychiatric help at all. It was just, take this pill, let me know how it goes for you. So I did that. And within 4 days, I think I had every severe side effect that's listed on the medication. And I took myself off of it. And that's the biggest no-no when it comes to these meds, is to take yourself off, because then I really spiraled out of control. So like I said, this was right before my 27th birthday. One of the things that the OCD, the narrative that I had built in my head around this, was that I was going to die when I turned 27.
Oh, wow.
And the only reason that that thought was stuck in my head was because a lot of my idols died when they turned 27. Kurt Cobain, Jimi Hendrix, all these musicians. And even though I would tell myself, this isn't rational. You're not a rock star. You're not doing heavy drugs, right? I was drinking, but I was kind of in denial about my drinking as well. But all of these things, I just knew, this isn't me. But yet the thought would not go away. You're going to, it was this repetitive thought. You're going to die when you turn 27. So I had all of these factors kind of come up to this point. So I took myself off the medication, started to spiral completely out of control. It was Thursday, February 28th, 2002. I couldn't stand it anymore. The thoughts in my head were just out of control. So I went to bed. And as I'm laying in bed, I could hear 2 men have a conversation in the living room. And I knew that there were not 2 men in the living room. And that's what terrified me. It was pure terror at that point. So then Friday, March 1st, I go to work, and I know I shouldn't go to work. But I'm just trying. I'm like, I want some normalcy in my life. So I'm going to go to work. And when I get there, I couldn't control it anymore. That's when I wouldn't say I snapped, but I had that feeling of there is no more controlling this. I had people wanting to ask me questions about work, and I just stood up. I turned around and looked at my boss, and I said to her, if I don't leave right now, I'm going to hurt someone. And I'm one of the least violent people you'll ever meet. And And she didn't know how to react to that. Most people wouldn't, right? We're not trained in how to deal with mental crisis. And she just said, okay. And I drove myself to the mental hospital here in Omaha. Called my wife, said, you should meet me at the hospital. And she did. They did the intake and they asked me, if we send you home right now, do you feel safe? And I said, nope, no, this is where I need to be. They then walked us up to the mental ward, and going through those doors, I thought I may never leave the hospital again in my life. I thought I would probably, I was admitting myself for life, and turning around and looking and seeing my wife stand there and knowing she's pregnant. It just ripped my heart out. But I couldn't lie about it anymore. I had to get help. So yeah, that's what I did. I checked myself into the hospital, and that was when it became very real that I had. It's a very long-winded answer, but that's when it became real that I am mentally ill.
Wow. Yeah. And I think you shared some stuff there that I actually hadn't heard before. But I so appreciate your openness to share stuff like that. I mean, that's quite the journey that you were on. And I think in a lot of cases, one that doesn't get shared very often, especially when it comes to going to into an actual clinical setting, like you mentioned there in Omaha. But I think it also says something about just how, I don't know, present you still were able to be, even with this all going on, at least enough to say, I need to get to this place and to be able to get yourself there.
Yeah. I was really lucky in that with my particular mental illness, I didn't lose full control. You'll hear these stories where somebody gets, they lose absolute control. Like they'll take all their clothes off and then the police find them in the middle of the street yelling, right? So I am very grateful that I didn't get to that point. But it showed me how fragile the mind is, and that if you don't take care of your mental health, you can end up like that. And also, the thing that really stressed me out, I was talking about the violence. Well, my particular flavor of OCD that I suffer from is violent ideation. And it's just out of nowhere. Like if I, it'll kick in and it'll just be like, pick up that knife and stab yourself. If I was in a meeting, it would be pick up the trash can and start smashing people. And then so I would have this internal struggle where I'd go, nope, nope, nope. Right. So I was always fighting it. I was fighting that voice. And then I started to think that only monsters would have those types of thoughts. I must inherently be a bad person. And there is no way I could admit to anybody that these are the types of thoughts I have in my head. They're going to put me in a straitjacket. And that was that moment, like getting myself to the hospital. It was a moment of surrender. And just like full on surrender. I need somebody else to take it from here. And so when I met with the doctors, I remember it was the doctor who was on for the day, and then there were like I think 3 doctors who were in residence. And so to have these 4 people essentially interviewing me, and like, okay, I'm going to tell you everything. I need help that bad that I'm not going to hold back. I'm going to tell you every single thing that I've experienced over the last 2 years in the hopes that you could help me. And if you can't, I know I'm staying here forever. And so I told them everything. Like right now, my brain is saying, pick up that trash can and hit you, or pick up the chair and throw it at you. And I expected them to kind of like lean back and like, oh shit, this guy's nuts. And instead they leaned forward and they said, we can help you. You're not going to be here forever. And that changed, like that. I hadn't felt hope in years. And when the
Wow.
doctor said, we are going to be able to help you, it was like in the act of surrender, I had hope.
That's incredible, man. And I feel like it's also a really good analogy, albeit maybe a pretty intense one, of almost what we need to do at a societal level when it comes to people's mental and emotional well-being is we need to start leaning in instead of leaning away. You know, when you've got a friend that comes to you that's telling you about how they're feeling because finally they've hit their version of rock bottom or hopelessness, and they're willing to finally get over their fear to share it with somebody. And our reactions are like, whoa, that's heavy, man. Like, that's not part of this relationship. Keep that over there. It's the opposite of what you experience, which is exactly what gave you hope. What do you think that we can do for people in our lives who might come forward and share hard stuff like that? Like, how can we proverbially like lean in?
Yeah, and it is really, really difficult. We're not trained to have those conversations. We're barely, it's like we're barely trained to have good communication to begin with. So when it comes to super heavy things like that, I encourage anyone who's interested to go through mental health first aid training.
Is this a real thing?
It is. Yep. There's a couple of different ways to go about it. I know that there's a 4-hour class and there's an 8-hour class. So I did the 8-hour training. A couple of years back, I organized a training here in Omaha. Almost every city has a group that will lead mental health first aid training. And you get a little certification after going through that process. But it just teaches you how to have the conversation, how to listen to somebody who's potentially in crisis. What kind of questions can you ask to determine the level of severity? Oftentimes we think, well, if we think somebody is suicidal, the last thing you want to do is ask them if they're suicidal. And that's actually the wrong way to think about it. If somebody is in crisis and they are contemplating taking their life, it is absolutely appropriate to ask, are you thinking about taking your life? Because that's how you can start to gauge that severity. And if they say yes, then you know the next question to ask. Do you have a plan in place? Yes. Do you have a date and time? Yes. Right. And then that way, okay, now I need to, I'm going to sit here with you and I'm going to call 911 and we're going to get you the help you need. It's okay. Rather than, oh, this ain't my problem. Or, well, let's send you home and hope it doesn't happen. And then I'm going to talk to all my friends, like, oh, they're thinking about killing themselves. What do I do? We need that kind of training. And we need that awareness. I think it just starts with awareness.
Well, then I feel like it gets a little bit more exacerbated as men because I would say on the whole, we're more likely to, when a vulnerable or a tough thing is coming up that we get uncomfortable talking about or dealing with, it's like, oh, how about those Chiefs? They really pulled it off there at the end, even with Mahomes out. And, your friend sitting over in the corner about like, I'm about to lose it because my marriage feels like it's about to fall apart, or I don't know what to do about being a dad, out of blue. And how do we stay in those moments? I mean, I think crisis is one thing, certainly. Like, I didn't even know that mental health first aid training is a thing. Like, I put that at the top of my list now. But what are some other things that you think that we can do when it's maybe not at that level, just to be more open to hear what our friends might need to be bringing up or talking about?
Yeah, I think it could start with a real simple question of, how can I support you? If you're unwilling or if you're uncomfortable to support someone, I think that's a normal reaction for men in particular. Throughout most of our lives, we've been taught we can only have two emotions, either happy or anger, happiness or anger, right? So to actually understand that there's this full color wheel of emotions to choose from, We just don't have a vocabulary around it. It's really hard for men. So I think it's like, how do we as society start to train men to feel emotion, to understand what they're feeling, and that it's okay to express it, and that it's okay to support each other around emotional topics, instead of just being, yeah, let's just talk about football, or suck it up, man, don't be a wimp. Those types of things are not helpful. That's why we've ended up in this situation that we're in. So I think it takes a lot of men being vulnerable, who are willing to share their stories, to be vulnerable, to talk about their emotions publicly. That it's going to have to start there. But yeah, if you come across somebody and you think that they're struggling, just ask them how they're doing. It also brings to mind, like, the when we say to each other, "How you doing?" "Great." "How are you?" "Great." I think we need to kind of dig a little bit deeper. How are you really doing? I'm noticing something. I notice you just, you've been a little more quiet than normal. It's okay to talk to me. And I would say, through the vast majority of my experiences, people are craving an outlet, someone to talk to.
That's what I found time and time again, is that if you ask that, you're not trying to push somebody, you're just trying to create that space to let them know that, hey, if you didn't notice the space was here in the first place, it's definitely here now, by me coming back and say, how are you really doing? Or, I noticed you've been, a little bit distant, or, it seems like you're a little tense. What's going on? How are you? Is the floodgates just open if it's the
Yep.
right time and place, and there's like just enough trust in that relationship for it to come out. It also makes me think about how it has to be there for both people. And to your point earlier, maybe you don't want to create that space for people, and I think that that's okay. Like, not everybody has to do it. If that's not your thing, if you're not able to support it, especially, then by all means, don't make that space. But I think being able to, as guys, have more comfort to share what we see in each other, whether it's, it seems like you've been running late to the games, or I haven't heard from you as much recently, or, just noticing people's behaviors and using that as a way to say, without judgment, how are you? So powerful.
Yeah. Yeah. And if you don't feel equipped, just offering to, like, I know you're struggling. Is there a way, somebody we can get you to talk to? Like, I can help. I'll reach out to my network or my friends to see who you might be able to talk to. Just be there for them, so that someday you're not caught off guard when they are in full blown crisis. That's one of the things that I talk a lot about, is getting help as soon as you notice something's off. Getting help early will, first of all, you'll be able to heal faster, and you won't spend months or possibly years suffering. But we're really good at just shoving things down and ignoring what's going on. Especially, like, for some reason, I find that men have a real hard, they find it really difficult to connect with their body.
Mm-hmm.
When, in my experience, it was, my body was giving off all of these red flags. The First of all, panic attack. That's my body just going, I can't take this. And so that's what it was doing. But the chest pains, the sickness in my stomach, the anxiety and OCD isn't something that crept up on me when I was 25. It just didn't magically happen after that parachuting or the skydiving experience. But it's something I dealt with since I was a child. I just didn't have a vocabulary. I didn't know how to express myself with what was going on. Anxiety was a huge part, especially in my adolescent. Like, it really crept in 12, 13, 14 years old. I was scared to death of things. But I just didn't, I didn't know how to name it. I didn't know what to say about it. I didn't want to be I felt picked on enough. I didn't want to be picked on because of emotions.
Right.
You know? When I was really young, there was this kind of label that stuck with me was I was a shy kid. Well, it was actually because I was pretty terrified of most things. So yeah, I think that there's a lot more we need to be doing around emotional intelligence, teaching people about what they're feeling, what's your body telling you. Don't ignore it.
Yeah, I hadn't. Well, outside of myself and sort of my experience, it's similar to you in that I don't really. Up until a couple months ago, I hadn't started my mental health story, if you will, until the age of, I don't know, whatever, 24 is when something happened that was enough for me to go and say like, hey, something doesn't feel right here. And I went to a general practice doctor just like you.
Mhm.
But then once I had language for it, it was like, oh my gosh, no, this has actually been something that's been with me for a long time. And it was really interesting earlier when you were talking about you wore a heart monitor for a month. I did the same thing in
Mhm.
third grade.
Really?
And yeah, and it was, I've written about like it was the heart monitor. I've had my lungs looked at. I had my stomach looked at. I mean, everything. And it was like, Adam, like everything comes back. It looks good. Like you get good grades. You seem to have friends. Like you're in shape. Like vitals look good. I don't know what's going on. And I was talking to my mom about this the other day. And I said, it's interesting when you kind of look at what the, I don't know, conditions of the age are, if you will. And at that time, I remember everything was all about stress. Like all my parents' books were about stress this, stress that, de-stress. And it was crazy to think that a kid in elementary school would have any sort of stress, right? And so it wasn't even like it was in the doctor's list order of operations to even consider anything like anxiety in a 7, 8, 10-year-old.
Yep.
And then just come to find out, yeah, the reason that I, was literally on the toilet some mornings for hours because my stomach was just curled up in knots, like wasn't kind of because I had a stomach problem. It was because I had an anxiety problem.
Yep. Yeah. And if somebody would have had the awareness, like as a third grader, of course you're not going to have the awareness, but if some adult would have had awareness around that, and we're able to alleviate your suffering and talk about it and say, what's going on? I ended up in therapy. But so my first time in therapy, I was 11 years old. And it was because, my parents were divorced. My dad moved to Pendleton, Oregon when I was 5 years old. And I was being bullied pretty severely in fifth grade. I wanted to escape. And so my mom was like, I was living in Sioux City, Iowa. She said, you're not moving with your dad. You're going to see this therapist. And there was a lot of shame around that as an 11-year-old and a boy. And it's like, oh, they're saying something's wrong with me. And that's all I could feel. Something's wrong with you. And what I was really feeling was, who's going to take care of me? I need to feel safe. And so I'm going to try to construct my own safety net here. And the only thing I can think of is get the hell out of here and move to Oregon. And then when I was in therapy, like within 2 or 3 sessions, I was like, okay, I don't want to go through this anymore. I'm going to tell him whatever he wants to hear. And it worked. And then he said to my mom, yeah, he doesn't need to see me anymore. Because I was like, yep, I don't want to move no more. I want to stay here. Just whatever I could to get out of those therapy sessions. So my first experience with therapy wasn't great. So the thinking about going into therapy again at any point was, like, oh, I don't want to do that because that was a bad experience. Yeah, I probably should have. I probably should have stayed in therapy if he would have dug deep and been like, yeah, no, you're not getting out this easy. Let's really talk about what's going on. One of my first jobs out of college, every morning I threw up. I'd show up at work and I threw up because I had so much anxiety in my stomach. But then again, I had no idea that it was mental. I just thought I convinced myself I was allergic to milk and I quit drinking milk.
How about that? That's a really good one. Yeah, it's amazing what we can convince ourselves of to avoid the areas that feel painful to us, especially those areas that are really created through, societal norms and stuff. Like the stigma around seeking help is for people who are broken. It's why I talked to a guy last week, Eric Nielsen, who was talking about his relationship with his therapist, and he's like, any guy that I've talked to who's been in therapy, they always say, I wish I would have seen a therapist sooner.
Mm-hmm.
And most of them continue to see a therapist at the same interval as if they'd go and see their dentist. It's like, it's not, things are good and steady right now, so I don't need to go and see my dentist every single week because that would be overkill. But I check in twice a year just so that I can have somebody do like a checkup on this thing up here, which turns out is probably at least in our day and age, is like our most valuable organ, given that it produces the bulk of the value for us, controls the rest of these things. It's like, let's make sure that thing is taken care of.
Yep.
So let's fast forward forward again to you are in the hospital in Omaha, getting care, and you've now made it through. What's life like afterwards? What does self-care look like for Matt?
Yeah. Great question. So,
and I don't want to gloss over your experience in there by all intents and purposes, but I figured the self-care part's important.
Yeah. That's a kind of good way to segue into this. So I was only in the hospital for 4 days, and really I probably could have been out in two and a half, but it was a weekend. And so I had to wait till Monday but when I got out, there was a feeling of euphoria. Because again, I had not felt good in so many years. And I was on the right medications. My brain was starting to chemically come back to normal. And all I wanted to do was talk. I'm not a big talker, right? And my wife said, you wouldn't shut up for 2 weeks. All I did was I would talk to anybody who would listen. Because I felt joy, and I wanted to talk. I wanted to talk about my experience. The doctors were really good about telling me, hey, if you want to maintain this, here's what you got to do. You have to see a psychiatrist, and you have to see a therapist regularly. So for the first 3 years after I got out of the hospital, I was really good about it. I wanted to make sure that the medication, I never had a reaction of, I want to get off this medication, which a lot of people will tend to have. Like, no, I want to take this as the least amount of time as possible. I didn't have that reaction to one of my medications. I did. I was on Xanax, and that one scared me because it made me feel really good. And I had also done research about its addictive properties. So I was only on Xanax maybe 4 or 5 months, and I didn't need it anymore. That got me over the hump. But I kept up on my medication. I increased it when it was appropriate, and I would talk to my doctor and say, "Hey, a lot of my symptoms are coming back." And he would say, "Okay, let's go up, 50 milligrams." And so we would do these, until we got it right. We kind of had it locked in. And then a big piece of it was not just relying on medicine or therapy, but having a mindfulness practice. And being able, so something out of that experience, there was a definite hole in my life. And I went searching to what would fill that hole. And it was pretty clear that it was having a spiritual practice. I was missing that component. And so I did research into different religions and spiritual practices. And the one that stood out to me most was Buddhism, because it was less of a dogma religion. It was more, there's meditation, and here are the benefits of meditation. So I got pretty deep into a meditation practice. And what it allowed me to do was just sit with my thoughts. It taught me how to be an observer of my thoughts and not a participant. It allowed me to see that when a thought arises, that I don't have to dig into it and be a part of it, and I could actually question it. Okay, why is that there? What's coming up for me right now? How am I feeling? Biggest key learning was, prior to this, I had let my ego drive much of my behavior because I thought my ego was who I was. But through meditative practice, when ego would arise, I could name it and go, oh, there you are, ego. Okay, I see you. And I didn't have to, play its game. And that was a really key insight for me. So, same thing with my OCD. When I have those intrusive thoughts, these violent thoughts, I could look at it and go, oh, there you are. Where it used to terrify me, now when they pop up, I can laugh at them because I'm not going to act on them. If they get really loud, then I know that something's off, that I'm probably not getting enough rest. Or, oh yeah, last Saturday I had too much to drink. Right? So it's like a signal. Things are getting a little out of whack. Focus on your health, get the rest you need, eat right. And so I don't have that kind of terrified response anymore. So yeah, and we have all of these different voices that come up in our head. I'll tell my story, and people will come up to me afterwards and like, I never told anybody this before, but I have, it feels like I have sexual intrusive thoughts. And I'm like, oh yeah, that's one of those, like part of OCD. Some people, it shows up as sexual for them. For me, it's violence. For other people, it's different things, right? And they're like, just the relief you can see on their face, like, I'm not a weirdo. I'm not a crazed person. There's somebody like me in the world. And what I want to say is there's an entire community like you, this neurodiverse community. And there's no reason that we need to hide in the shadows and, be quiet about these things. We should talk about it.
I love the word neurodiverse so much. I know some people have kind of been with it because it's just another spectrum to pay attention to. But I love it because it's so descriptive of all the different ways that things go on up in here. But also, as you pointed out, that you're 99.9%. It's not just you, and probably 100% of the time, you're not the only person that this is happening to. It's happened to some other human at some point in time, and they're probably out there looking for you at this same point. One thing I want to come back to is around mindfulness and meditation. And I feel like that can be overwhelming for some people or too woo-woo for other people. What really helped you get started with it?
So it's something that my teacher, he was the abbot at the Zen center that I was going to. And he just said, you have to stick with it. It's a practice. You'll never be perfect at meditation. There's this idea. So what trips people up a lot of times is they'll sit in meditation and think that they suck at it because their brain didn't go blank. Right. And I'll say to them, like, I'm 20 years into my meditation practice, and I am like, I'll have moments of where it's pretty quiet, but then, oh, here comes the thought. Oh, I didn't do that. I didn't schedule this. And it's just the relationship I have with those thoughts now that has changed. It doesn't mean you're going to be blissed out and not think about anything anymore. We're just going to let the thought come up. Sometimes it's described as watch the thought, imagine that it's a leaf on a stream, and let the thought flow by. And then it pops up again, and you just have to repeat that exercise. So for me, I didn't start to really see benefits from meditation for probably 3 years. Right. And so when I say that to people, they're like, oh, I can't, I'm like, well, just give up 20 minutes a day for 3 years. And I guarantee you'll get amazing results. But it's hard. We are a culture that wants immediate results.
We do. And I'll throw this out there at the other end of the spectrum for everybody who watches this, is that I feel like I was able to get I was able to notice a difference in my life, in my sleep, based on if I do a meditation or mindfulness or just sitting quietly and breathing for some period of time, whatever you want to call it. And who knows? I mean, that's what I tell myself, is that like, oh, I've noticed, because I track this on the days that I meditate in the mornings, that I tend to sleep better at night. And sure, there's other things at play there. But for whatever reason, these last 2 weeks, meditation has been really challenging for me. And like, I go in waves. I'm curious, like, does it kind of ebb and flow for you too? Where some days and weeks are harder than others, or just thoughtier than others?
Yeah. Yep. And so I know we've talked about this before, but the concept of there is no good and there is no bad meditation. It just is. Right. So I'm very conscious of not labeling the meditation that I just did. I can sit there and I can be quiet, and my mind is, in Buddhism, they talk a lot about monkey mind. It's just the chatter. And I'll just notice it. Oh, okay. Really active brain today. And I don't beat myself up over it. And I just go, oh, I got my 20 minutes in. Move on with my day. And then there's other days where it's just like in the zone, really feeling centered, feeling peace. And in just the same way, I don't get up off the mat and pat myself on the back either. Right? I don't go, oh shit, I nailed that meditation today.
I'm not gonna lie, I've done that a couple times. I'm like, ooh, that was a good one. Maybe I should have stayed in a little bit longer. That was so damn good.
That's okay. But I think getting beyond the labeling it good or bad, and just being accepting of what it is and present. Yeah. And that's the thing. The real key thing about a mindfulness practice is not the time that you spent on the cushion. It's when you take that out into the world with you. So when there's chaos all around you, how do you come back to center? And how do you stay calm? And when you notice things that you're feeling panicky and you're feeling stressed, just being able to take 8 to 10 deep breaths, coming back to center. That's it. I mean, a really simple exercise is just breathing. Oftentimes when we're stressed, we stop breathing. We take really shallow breaths. Our heart rate increases, so we're not getting as much oxygen. And we wonder, why am I feeling this? Oh, I'm feeling stressed. I need to get out of here. Well, if you can have that awareness, build in some awareness around that and go, I need to breathe right now. You know how many times that has saved me in a meeting where I'll feel tense and I'm getting sweaty and, oh man, this is like, and then I'll just go, Matt, you got to breathe. And nobody knows. Nobody has a clue what's going on. And I'll just sit there and just a deep, soulful, belly extending breath. And my God, and just doing that just now, oh, I can feel it in my body. Like, oh, I want more of that.
I can tell you had like a different demeanor and energy come about you. I love that you're sharing that too, that you would do it in meetings. That was one of my favorite things, especially if it was, I generally like speaking, but I still get the nervousness, although I've relabeled it excitement beforehand, but sometimes it's too excitement. Yeah. And same thing, like I'd be in a staff meeting, just quickly mute my mic. I can look normal, do my deep breaths. Nobody's going to pay attention because there's 60 other faces up there. And then like, boom, I'm in the zone, ready to go do my thing, and nobody's the wiser. And I got my breaths in.
Yeah, exactly. One of my biggest fears in life is public speaking. And, a couple of years ago, if you would have told me, Matt, you're going to be up in front of audiences of 300, 400, 500 people telling your story, I would have been like, you are full of shit. But because of the mindfulness and because of, like you just mentioned, changing the idea of I'm afraid to no, I'm excited, like activating that, it's the same nerves. Fear and excitement operates off those same nerves, but you shift that energy, it is so incredibly powerful. So you learn these things through mindfulness. And I'd encourage anybody who's interested, really give it a try and don't give up. Keep with the mindset of this is a practice, right? You're not going to perfect it. Just keep at it and you will see benefits.
Yeah, it's interesting. It seems like there's a lot of things that are coming out as good for us that almost need like a rebranding or a different way to think about them. And you've got meditation, mindfulness, breathing exercises like we're talking about. It's like, how do we figure out how to make that more desirable for people, and at the same time understand that this isn't something that you become an expert at or perfect or is good or bad. It's just the thing that you're going to do. It's just like, it should be just like breathing or walking. Like, nobody goes around saying like, ooh, I walked really good today, but like you know that you went for a walk, or like, I was really good at chewing just then, nailed that chewing. But then there are these other things that we like bring so much judgment around, or we have all this stigma around getting help for, like mental health. But like, we'll go see a doctor, we'll go see a dentist, we'll go see a chiropractor, we'll get massages, but like, have to touch this? Well, if I have to do that, it means that it's really broken. So I'm just going to avoid it and pretend it's not that way.
Yep. Yeah, that's that damn stigma that's still kind of sticking around. I'm really, really hopeful though, because I'm seeing a lot of people come out and tell their story, and especially with everything that's gone on in the world, what's happening to our soldiers coming back from war. It seems like the dialogue is headed in the right way. More people are interested in mental health. There's more importance around it. High profile people who are committing suicide, it kind of just elevates that awareness, and we need to have more discussions about it, more outlets, and not think of it as that we're broken, because we're not. If we have something that goes wrong with our liver or our kidneys, we don't automatically think, oh, I'm a failure, I'm broken. It's the same thing with this organ. You're not broken because there's something that's not right, or you're not feeling well. You need help, and you deserve help.
Yeah. You're worthy of help.
Right. Exactly.
Yeah, it makes me, where my head just went was the progression that our knowledge of medicine and how our bodies work and all that has really evolved over time, and how there certainly was a period of time when if there was something the matter with you physically, that it was like, oh, there's a demon in you, right? Like, we literally thought that for a period of time, right? And so it was like, oh, yeah, there's something the matter with me. I have demons inside of me. And then the demons kind of went to our heads, and it's like, okay, well, we don't know what to describe it as, so it must be demons.
Yeah.
And it's like, we've exorcised those demons now, but we still haven't made supporting this something that is not only okay, but encouraged and seen as a sign of strength. And I think that that's kind of what you're hinting at, and certainly something that I've been seeing more, is people really wearing their mental health as a badge of honor and as something that is part of them. Maybe I won't go so far as to say that they're proud of it, although I think some people are. They're proud of being able to be open about it. But that's the type of shift that, on this one-to-one basis really starts to open it up for everybody else.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I'll be very honest. When I tell my story, I feel relief. I feel a sense of I'm not shame. I don't feel shame about what I went through. I don't necessarily like being neurodiverse. Isn't part of my identity. It's just something I have. And then the other thing about it is, when I tell my story, especially like if I'm giving a talk in front of an audience, without a doubt, there are people who are lined up to talk to me afterwards. And so it's like giving them a permission slip to get help. I have this thing where every time I give a talk and I start to feel the butterflies, and I'm trying to shift the nervous energy into excitement, I'll just say, okay, who's my Leon today? Because very first talk I had a gentleman come up to me, and it was a really, really amazing interaction. Somebody who really struggled, but didn't have anybody to talk to, and had never heard their story like what they were experiencing, they never heard another human being talk about that. So in that
Mm.
moment of connection, feeling like they weren't alone. And so that's what I hope to, helping others helps me. It's this back and forth. And yeah, when I first started talking, people would be like, wow, you're so brave. Well, not really, because I was outed from the beginning. Like, I had a mental health crisis in front of an office of people, right? So I never felt like I was truly hiding. There were a bunch of witnesses who saw it. And so when I came back to work, I couldn't hide. I went, yep, I was in the hospital for 4 days, and this is what I experienced. And I had one guy who said to me, I had no idea. And Matt, if this can happen to you, it can happen to any of us. I thought you were the most put together person in the office. Nope,
Yeah.
not at all. So,
Yeah, I remember I hadn't ever talked about mental health at work until a couple of years ago. And it's funny, I can feel it in the moment. But there was some moment in a fairly large meeting that I just decided I was going to say something about it, and just call out that I've dealt with depression and anxiety and was on medication for a period of time, and talked about some of the other mental health challenges in my family, and it was just like the energy in the room completely shifted, and it's amazing what that can do by just sliding that little bit of vulnerability into a group of people. Just opens up all kinds of feelings, good, bad, and different, just feelings, that other people can really get out there and express. And then it's so lovely hearing from people that are, can say things like, your experience with Leon or the guy at your work is like, okay, yeah, I mean, it felt good for me. It just was authentic, and I'm just sharing what is. And then for you, now it creates this possibility that maybe wasn't there before. Like, we don't get to have that many opportunities in life to do that for people.
Yeah. Yeah. It's, we're humans, and we love stories. That's how we connect. We connect through stories. So, yeah, if we're feeling up to it, let's share a piece of our humanity, be vulnerable, talk about what we are personally struggling with, and use that as an invitation for others to do the same.
Yeah. Well, I propose that we do a two-parter because we didn't get to coaching, but I think we could probably talk for coaching about another hour. And I know that you and I both want to talk about coaching versus therapy, and how did you become a coach, and what could somebody expect in doing that. So I vote to have you come back on again, which means this is now your chance. I always like to say, what's your parting thought for guys or people out there who are watching this that you want to leave them with?
Yeah, I would say it's okay to get help. It's okay to ask for help. If you are struggling with something right now and you feel alone, you don't have to. You don't have to be alone anymore. Get the help you deserve. It will not ruin your life to get help. People will not shun you, even though it feels like it. And there may be some people in your life who won't react in the best way. I would just say, if you can, dig down deep inside of you and ask yourself, how do I want to feel? And if the answer is I want to feel better, then go out there and get the help you need.
There you go. Wise advice. Well, thanks, Matt, so much for being here.
Absolutely.
I always love our conversations. It was great
Likewise.
to have you on this mandate.
Thank you for having me, and I can't wait for part 2.
All right. We'll talk to you again soon.
All right. Take care.
All right, everybody, that does it for this episode of The Mandate. If you'd like to get in touch with Matt, this is his coaching. Oops, sorry, not good at this pointing thing yet. This is his coaching website right there. Best way to get in touch with him. And then, of course, we'll talk about coaching next time. So hopefully you got something out of this episode. I know that I do every single time I get to hang out with our amazing guests on these mandates. If you are watching this on YouTube, make sure that you subscribe and hit that little bell button so that you can find out when we go live and when we've got new shows that we release weekly. And then, of course, if there's anybody in your life that could benefit from hearing from this, please send this to them and let them know. And then if you do need more professional support, please reach out to myself or Matt. We're more than happy to guide you on your journey. So with that, thanks for tuning in. Have a great evening, day, morning, whatever it is for you. And we will see you on the next episode.